Hi, I'm Debbie. I'm a grad student at UB. I'm from the southern tier. I'm from Broome County, and I was just wondering, so I know that at least in Broome County we get a lot of like seasonal flooding and stuff like that, especially around the Susquehanna. Is there like a hazards analysis you do to determine if you're going to have any issues with seasonal flooding or anything like that?
Well, again, what we've done is basically we coordinate with the emergency management office. You heard about what happened in Bradford County. If you travel down through Pennsylvania, their emergency hazardous people and their spill people are pretty good. And they were on the scene, maybe not fast enough for some people, but for most. But again, that's what we would do is do that. And like I said, before we get a permit, we have to submit a plat to the DEC. And they're going to check to see if it's on a floodplain or not. And if it is, there's certain setbacks that, you know, have to be followed.
I have a question.
Yes, with all the hydrofracking that's been done in the surrounding states, especially Pennsylvania, what are they actually doing with the gas? Is it being used by the American consumer? Is it being stored in storage tanks? Is it being exported? What's being done with the gas?
Truthfully, I don't know because, again, I don't work for those companies. If I was for gas, that might tell you. But I will tell you this, on the average, they're producing about 3.5 million cubic feet per day. Again, more than likely it's getting pipelined into, for the eastern cities. You have the Millennium Pipeline that runs there, the Iroquois. So I think that it's probably going toward those inner cities. Take a look at gas prices. They've been kind of down. Again, if it was being shipped abroad, I would think the price would be a little bit higher.
One other question. Are there companies that you know of that will actually explore for oil and gas that do both?
Well, see, that brings us to the topic of the Point Pleasant in Ohio. Maturity says that you might get condensate and you might get gas from the same oil.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good talk.
Thank you.
I was wondering, when we think about, you're drilling a the hole down there, and you're going to case it, you're going to do the frack. So how tight a seal do you think you get between, the casing and actual hole? But then when you frack it, I mean, it just destroys the casing, right? So that's like one question. And then the other, can you get like capillary action going back up the tube? And then the third is, how does actually the gas come back into the pipe? Like if you frack any fracture that's above the pipe, why does the gas come back down into the pipe? It would make sense that if you frack below the pipe, then all the gas would rise into the pipe. But, is there any knowledge like what happens above it?
Well, let me take your questions one at a time. All right. The first one, you said that the casing would disintegrate. Is that what you were saying?
Correct. Like how tight a seal do we get from the casing to the ground?
You get a pretty good tight seal, and when you don't have a good cement job, then you get those microannuluses that occasionally come up and that could push methane into another reservoir. Now, that happens, but again, it doesn't happen all the time. But I think that's one of the reasons that Dimick happened. You had these small microannuluses, you didn't have a good cement job. So basically you had methane in the water and the water table's up above. And to answer your second question, it's just a pressure gradient. And what we had, and this is the funny story about the Ross 1, I was sitting at a meeting of about 1,000 people in Chenango County, and somebody got up and said, well, we know that Gas Stem USA's frac truck is riding around the state because it has this flowback that was rejected by Watertown. What that was kill fluid. Basically, what we were worried about is having an overpressured situation because the pressure gradient would be so high, and that's what pushes the gas out of the hole. Again, we didn't find that. So what we had to do is we had to get rid of the kill fluid, and unfortunately we didn't test it before we sent it back to Watertown and it came back. But again, it wasn't traveling throughout the state, but that just helped me relate that story to you.
Thanks.
I have a question.
Thank you, Rich. Well done.
Thank you.
2 questions, if I could. According to the Wall Street Journal, half-page explanation of the accident in Pennsylvania. It was a blowout. Over 12 hours, uncontrolled blowout. Families in the area evacuated, pollution of various streams. Now, Chesapeake, a very well-respected drilling company, not a fly-by-night. Okay, so what are you doing, and what is up here, this first question, that's different than they are to prevent this from happening here? And then secondly, there's a lot of people that say that small business in America, too much regulation, too much paperwork. We should let them go and really be the drive of jobs and so forth. When you look at the process that you have to follow, is there too much regulation? Is it wasted regulation? Is there just uncalled for regulation? Speak to those two questions, if you would, please.
No problem. Chesapeake is a fine company. If you heard when I talked, basically they build a berm around their facilities. Now, I don't know how much as far as volume came up through that blowout, but I do know that the DEP of Pennsylvania was on the site. They were testing creeks. People were evacuated and were allowed back in their houses by early afternoon. Again, not being on site, I don't know how you would do better, but what we're trying to do, we talk about this type of stuff. Well, what happens if you have a leak or a blowout of something like that? Again, the Ross well was very small, so that's why you didn't see those berms there. But if you're going to go and do something like that, we're always thinking about, do we put liners underneath the matting that we have? Do we have French drain systems? Well, what happens when it rains? These are questions that engineers can handle. This is not rocket scientists, and I think we'll get better at it. I hope that answers your first question. Again, not being on site in Bradford, I can't speak to how much was released and so forth. The second question, are we over-regulated? Rules are easy to follow. Tell me the rule. If I want to do the drilling, then I'll do the drilling and I'll follow the rules. So that's the easy part.
Okay. I had a question. I got a second question, clarification on something. On the casing, does the casing go the full depth of the hole, or I thought I heard you say that the casing on your well only went 95 feet below the...
No. What you saw, let's see. I'm sorry.
It's still down there.
Okay. Well, basically, the casing went down. You had 16 and 10 inches that went down to 126 feet. It was cemented. Then we had the surface casing that went down to 780 feet. Again, cemented from 780 to surface. Again, then we put down the production string that went down 4,950 feet, cemented all the way to surface. There was no lags in between.
Okay, I get that. Now, this is just a vertical well. I hear of horizontal wells. This was just a vertical well, correct?
Right.
Now, if this was a horizontal well, how do they get the casing around the curve? I mean, they drill down and make a large radius curve? Is that how?
Well, again, they do it engineering-wise. I'm not sure. I've never seen it firsthand, so I can't describe it to you. But they do it, and they do cement it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks.
I have a question.
You said that the people at Colgate looked into the toluene. What was the result?
Basically, it was almost similar to what we found in the flowback.
Yes, it came from where?
The Utica. So.
Okay, I have one other question. You said there were no spikes in your results a year later. Okay, and you've got 162, I think, parts per million total suspended solids, and compared to 190 this year. Okay, that to me would be a spike.
It's very small. But again, take a look at what it's based
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Banan Ransom. I'm a grad student in civil and environmental engineering. You had said at one point that the treatment plant in Watertown accepted 3% of the fracking fluid, and that it should be able to take up to 100% or greater than that.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought wastewater treatment plants were designed to operate in a certain optimized range in terms of flow and nutrient loading. And then later on in another slide, you said they weren't tracking nutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfide.
Right.
So is it correct to say that they can take 100 or more than 100% when, keeping in mind that these plants operate within a certain range?
Well, what I probably should have rephrased it by saying that they could handle more than just what we sent to them. Whether it be 100%, I'm not a wastewater treatment operator, so again, I don't have that perfect knowledge, but it could definitely handle more than the 3% that we sent.
Okay, and the big problem...
The one more thing, the other thing that they could do is, again, they could store it on site and then, pull as much as they could handle at different days. They had that capability.
Right, because of the salinity, right? That's the main issue with treating this water.
Well, again, not being a water treatment operator, I leave that in their good hands. And again, this is why we work with the water resources people. Those are the people that have that knowledge. Again, it would be way overhead to just say we kind of know all the answers.
Thanks, Richard.
You're welcome. Mm-hmm.
Are they using any dynamite or really powerful agents?
No. Basically, that's a mechanical charge that's set off, and it's a small charge. It's not like, I don't think it's dynamite.
So do the engineers have an idea how far those fractures go?
Yes. Basically, if you take a look at what they're doing in Pennsylvania, they use microseismic, and they could tell you how high and how far they've gone away from the hole.
And give us an example.
Basically, the farthest that I've seen them come from a hole is about 1,000 foot high and roughly the same amount long. So again, I didn't bring that slide tonight, but there are slides like that, and you'll see it probably in other presentations where they'll show you a case history of fracking, and you'll see that the water table is up here, and roughly several thousand feet, you'll see how far the fractures have went up. I know they've done one on the Barnett and one on the Marcellus.
Does the acid, hydrochloric acid or citric acid, does that form part of the fracture? Does it dissolve?
It would dissolve the calcite, so it's breaking down the shale that tightly holds the gas.
And there's a lot of calcite.
In certain parts. The upper part of both the Utica and the Marcellus is silty, and the basal portions are calcareous rich or calcium rich.
And where if you were drilling in a part that was silty, you would use less acid?
Yeah, I wouldn't. Again, you'd really not be doing anything other than what you're using it to do is clean out the holes.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much for a very informative presentation. Appreciate it. Since the fracking is done so far below the aquifer, in my mind, and I think you pretty much alluded to this, there is not methane being put into the aquifer through fracking. And those folks in Pennsylvania who are lighting their tap water have got methane in their water probably for hundreds of years. Is that a correct statement?
Initially, I want to say yes, but let me give you a little bit of background. If you look up water resources reports in Susquehanna County, they talk about water being able to burn the water in local creeks, okay? Not too far from here, in Fredonia, that was a saying that they used in the 1820s, talked about burning the creeks. Again, that's why William Hart, he put this down as well in Fredonia, gets gas. But the case that this gentleman made was that maybe the cement job is not as perfect as it should be, and you could have micro seepages that come up. Now, does it have to be studied? The only way to study that is to take gas samples. If you hit any type of gas or methane, you isotopically make a signature of that gas so you know that what you're doing is not contributing to the problem. So again, it's more testing, being a lot more careful. Yes, sir. I thought you had your hand up. Oh, I'm sorry.
My question is you use the cement for the casing now, which could possibly crack because we live in cold and warm climate constantly. How come we don't use like a plastic sleeve around the casing to go down there? As a guard.
Basically, as you go down below and you get deeper and deeper, you're getting warmer and warmer.
Yeah.
So there's a temperature gradient that, again, it's more warm than it is cold. The plastic, again, you're using...
So like a simple weld couldn't take the place of a...
What's going to happen is you're dealing with the casings that have particular strengths, which are usually about 10,000 PSI. And basically the pressure that you're using to generate these fracking techniques are usually less than 7,000.
Okay.
So you're not exceeding the pipe limits. Okay. So you're probably not going to have it. But again, you run your cement bond log to make sure that everything
My concern is the cement thing because around here cement cracks so easily.
Again, this is a differently engineered cement. This is not with aggregate in it. It's more liquefied.
Okay.
I guess I had a few little questions. One was, what, if anything, do people know about fracking in the vicinity of fault lines? We do have some faults here in western New York. There must be some data on that.
As far as fracking around faults? Basically, I think what they're going to try to do is develop or look for or frack around those faults because they're naturally fractured already. So again, as opposed to quiet areas that are not faulted or fractured. So again, it just helps them when you're breaking up the rock. Nature has done some of it. Now the thing that you want to be careful of is you don't want to hit zones that have open fractures that are in shallow places.
Have people done analogous studies to the one that you presented with horizontal fracturing, looking at the composition of the frac water for horizontal fracked projects?
What I'd like to do is I've seen the data up north in Quebec before they had the moratorium, and basically it's not too far or not too much different than what we've seen using 20,000 gallons. The changes are minimal.
Last but not least, would you define alpha, beta, and gamma?
What's that? What's
alpha, beta, and gamma? I'm sure it's not physics.
Basically, those are naturally radioactive constituents that what we do is we use a gamma ray curve that basically tells us where we are below the surface. Okay, beta, again, is a naturally radioreactive resource that we can measure. But again, we're not too worried about it. And the other place that you could gain information like that, again, I point to ASOGIS. ASOGIS is an excellent place to go to because if you look, they're specialized logs. They're called spectral logs, and basically they measure thorium, potassium, and what's the other one? Thorium, potassium. There's one more, and uranium. And again, you could see how hot these rocks are or not. Again, some of the more radioactive rocks are the more organic rich rocks, and that's what they look for.
Me? Okay, I am a novice. I have a few questions. One is, I went out to a Pennsylvania website and looked at the well analyses, and on those lists, I did see benzene, but I didn't see benzene on any of the lists you showed. Do you not use benzene?
Most of the time we don't. So again, it depends on what you're fracking. So we haven't. So.
Would you say that Marcellus Shale would require it?
Well, I think what's going to happen, and this is just my opinion, I think in order to get around some of these controversies is that there's going to be an accepted frac fluid that you can use that might be deemed safe. Now, whether that happens or not, I think it would be a pretty good idea. This way, everyone's using the same thing.
Yeah.
So, but the only reason that I say this is because you go to many of these meetings and people have the same, questions, and they want to know about it. And the people that it hurts is the service companies, because they have their proprietary formulas.
Yes, a standard formula that we all know and that DEC approves is
but
good.
Again, as I told you before, you submit that formula before you get approval. So if that is not approved by
Thank you.
DEC,
You've been very, very helpful for calming my fears. But otherwise, the money for the treatment plant, do you pay that?
Yes.
So whatever percentage you're shipping through a treatment plant is being paid
and
for.
We also paid for the testing, so that the treatment plant didn't do the testing.
Okay.
The one question, you just touched on something in my head, and I might as well answer this now. The list of questions said, well, what happens to the roads? Again, one of the things that we had to do is we put up bonds. So if the road is damaged, again, it's covered that way.
Okay, I'll remember that one. Then you showed us Chautauqua County, and those are all vertical wells?
Yes.
And you mentioned that they used less water. Did they also use fewer chemicals?
Well, basically, they did use chemicals to frack those wells.
Okay, so is that good or is that bad, using less water? I couldn't determine what
Well,
your
it depends on what you have to
thrust
do. The reason that they use more water is basically you're going to go out, down the hole, and maybe out 3,000 feet. So it's going to take a lot more water. And that's what makes the well more economical. In a vertical well, you just have a radius or a diameter that you're fracking. Now you're going to go out 3,000 feet and then frack that in different stages. And that's what makes the well bore more economical. So that's why they can produce 3.5 million cubic feet per day on the average.
Okay, and actually my last question is about Canada and their wells in Lake Erie. Yeah. Do you know anything about those? And they must be using what they term as mud, which is a chemical
Again, I don't know enough about them, but what I do know is that there's a lot of them on their side of the border.
Yes, 2,200.
And basically, they can only drill for natural gas. They can't drill for oil. So again, what gas was left on our side is probably all gone. So.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your talk. Excuse me. It seems to me I read several years ago that the Barnett Shale was requiring multiple refractors in order to be productive over their lifetime. I heard recently from somebody that they don't expect much refracturing in the Marcellus or Utica formations. Can you comment on that, please?
Well, basically, I guess I'd like to know your definition of refracturing, but let me answer your question. What they did in the Barnett, and maybe this is what they mean by refracturing, is they came in and basically they fracked the well. Now, their decline curves are pretty sharp. They fall rather quickly. Now, what they also did is basically they started 1,500 feet apart, okay? And they found that they got same pressures. They went down to 750, still got the same pressures. Went down to 250 feet away, and they got the same pressures. So again, the gas is held so tightly, it depends on what the rock will give up. Now, we don't know enough about the Utica and the Marcellus because, again, to a certain extent, the Marcellus is fairly new, and the Utica, there hasn't been enough wells drilled to even ponder that question just yet. But again, I think that's what they mean by refracturing. Now, they also might mean that they go back into the same hole. Again, I haven't done that or seen a case study on that, which would make sense to me if you have to go back. It's more like cleaning out the hole. But again, there's a certain life cycle on these wells, and once they're reached, I think you might be throwing money away.
You showed the map of Chautauqua, and there were 20,000 wells there?
Roughly 10,000.
10,000. So number one, where does that water go? And what are the 4 places where they treat the frack water? You said Watertown was one.
I knew Watertown was one. There's out here somewhere in Buffalo region. There's another place. I'm not sure. But again, this was something that I knew when we were doing this, where the other 2 places are exactly.
Okay,
I could
that's
get back
important
to
to me, and I don't, yeah. I think that's something people should try to find out about. Because the Buffalo Sewage Authority was taking water, and they were not evidently capable of treating it.
Right, but the places that I described were able to handle it.
Okay. But I still don't have an answer. So you said 3% of the water that was going to, Watertown was handling 3% from Otsego County.
Okay, here.
Or that was 3% of the water that they were treating in, no.
Okay. We shipped 32,000 gallons up, okay? All right, that represents 3% of their daily loading.
Of fracking fluid?
No, of what they can accept and process.
If 10,000 more wells were drilled in Otsego County, that would be a lot more percentage for them to handle.
That will never happen. And the reason that I say that is because basically you're looking at the upper limit here, okay? One, the DEC is not manned enough to handle 10,000 wells. 2, it would take many, many years to reach that potential, and that would be a waste of spacing. They would never drill 10,000 wells.
So, okay, so those are all vertical wells.
Right.
And those don't produce fracking fluid?
No. They basically were fracked, but again, at a lot less amount of water. We started roughly in the 70s when we went through the first oil embargo up until this map was made back in 2007. Yeah.
So that was a different way of getting the gas out? And
no, basically, no, it's not different.
The water.
It's the same way.
Except for the chemicals? Because it is a new process.
The difference of the process is that you're using more water. That's the difference.
But that water doesn't have to be taken away somewhere.
Well, basically, it wasn't an issue when they did that. Will they consider an issue now? I think they'll probably take a closer look at it.
I'm still confused. So what is wastewater produced by those wells?
Flowback water.
Flowback water.
Yes.
And they are somehow sending it somewhere.
Exactly.
Okay. But you don't take care of that. That's not your company that does that.
No, ma'am.
Okay. And you don't think they're going to put, how many wells do you think they're going to try to put?
Basically, at this point, it's too early to tell. Again, we've drilled 1 well, which is right here, okay? And we're evaluating that right now. Again, we haven't been able to test. It would be different if we were testing horizontals here, and we'd have better results that we could.
So what's a guess? What's a wild guess?
I'm not going to wild guess at all. Because then you'd hold me to it. So again, the best way to do it is to take a look at it case by case. Again, this happened over a while. Again, the upper 2 wells that we talked about, the Pulis and the Shekels, they were both fracked using almost similar type of fracks that you would use in the Medina also. Yes, sir.
Well spacing. The well spacing for these vertical, the well spacing for these vertical Medina wells is
40 acres.
And the well spacing that DEC is contemplating for Utica?
1 mile.
How much different is that? You're giving different units here. Can we translate that?
Again, it's an order of magnitude.
Order of magnitude farther apart.
Yes. So that, again.
So the density of wells will be necessarily an order of magnitude lower.
Well, but
of the
thing is,
pads.
you could put 16
Right.
horizontals as opposed to.
But in terms of individual pads.
Right, exactly. But again, it's just a matter of economics. That's what it comes down to.
How many different chemicals are in your fracking fluid?
5 that I knew of.
Do you test for all of those in the flowback?
We try to, and basically, as I said before, do I know all the answers? Not really. The thing that I think everyone is having the hardest time with right now is a test for biocides, and that's important to us, and that's one thing that we're taking a look as closely as we can.
But, okay, so moving to the hydraulic fracturing, where there are over 500 different chemicals in the fracking fluid, how do we deal with that?
I don't know if there's 500 different chemicals.
I've seen the list, over 500.
You've seen the list of different chemicals that people
Yes.
use. I don't know individually how many chemicals that they use per well. It's not 501.
I know, and people aren't so willing to tell us either.
Well, again, I'm willing to tell you.
I know you are, but I'm talking about hydraulic fracturing now.
Right. We hydraulically frac here, but at a smaller scale. What I'm telling you, I think as this discussion keeps on going further and further, more and more data will be released. It seems like Range Resources, even in the southwestern part of PA, is starting to disclose what they're putting down as far as frac fluid.
But we need to know.
I agree.
And so does the sewer authority.
And basically,
If they don't know what they're putting in, they don't know if they're taking it out.
that's why we did the testing before.
Yeah, and I understand, yeah.
Well, all I can tell you is that testing is crucial. And I think what I'm trying to do, and it's a hard task for even me to sell on occasion, is testing.
And what about radium?
Radium, basically that's why we sent it to the Department of Health in Albany. The test for the Marcellus flowback was 1.16 picocures, our original test, so I'm waiting on stuff from the health department to compare it to.
But there's concern about radium all over Pennsylvania and in several wells in the southern tier in New York about elevated radium levels.
Really worried because, remember I showed you the Marcellus outcrop, and that basically goes right across the state. Again, you have people who have water wells that are right in that bedrock they have that every day. But again, it's more radon than anything else, which the best part is it has a short half-life. And again, if you vent it properly, then it will take care of the problem.
Radon does, but not radium isotopes. Not all radium isotopes have a short half-life.
I know that, but what I'm telling you is that basically you're sitting on an outcrop over there, where the most dangerous would be those wells, just water wells there.
And just one last thing. Why, before drilling on someone's property, why isn't baseline testing done on their drinking water as a matter of routine?
I don't think, again, gentlemen talked about regulation. Nobody said you had to, but I think as the new guidelines come out, and again, these are guidelines, and you will have to, and I think that it's a pretty good practice. I live in the country. I depend on well water.
Yeah.
You know, so.
You'd want to know.
Exactly.
Like the gentleman down here was saying methane could have been coming out of their water for 100 years. Well, there's an easy test for that. Can you light your water?
What's that?
There's an easy test for that. Can you light your water before drilling, and can you light your water after drilling?
That's it. Here we go. Dr. Steve Osborne, who did the independent testing for us. He's a pretty known expert as far as dissolved gases in water. And again, what we had when we tested for methane in some of the wells that he tested for, it was less than 1 milligram per liter. Now, Dr. Osborne went down to 0.04 something. You know, his accuracy was even a lot better than the labs that we had. And what's interesting is it can become a pretty good exploration tool. I won't tell you why, but it's something that, you know, companies kind of embrace that. It might be something that they can use.
Is Russ One producing right now?
Ross 1 is not producing. They had 3 zones. We got an open flow of 30 MCF per day from the Marcellus. When we fracked it, it went up to 120 MCF per day. We had a 2 million cubic feet per day show in the Oneida. We tested that, and it was a limited reservoir. We fracked the Utica, and we were able to produce 70 MCF per day of gas. Now, all those amounts that I just talked about, with the exception of the Oneida, you'd have to produce at not extraordinary rate, but a longer rate than what they produced at, and then they would become economical. That's why the vertical versus horizontal, that's where the economics are made up.
Question over here. I guess to follow up on something the gentleman over there said, the last speaker, would you distinguish between hydrofracking and hydraulic fracturing? Compare and contrast. Because the his implication was that there are different processes, different blah, 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 things involved. And also, it seems as if the concept hydrofracking is something that's been introduced very recently, as if it's, kind of just occurred to people to do this in the past few years. The gentleman that spoke last week, however, indicated that fracturing had been going on, was developed probably in sometime in the 40s, perhaps.
Well, again, are we trying to differentiate between high volume fracking and low volume fracking? Because basically, this would be using a lot less water than what they're doing. Okay. Right.
Whether it's the carrier fluid, simply water, whether it's 20,000 gallons or 1 million gallons.
Right.
So, but they're the question. So, would both of those be considered
hydrofracking?
Hydrofracking. Could they also be properly characterized as hydraulic fracturing?
Again, I don't know what you mean by the term.
Well, I don't know. I just, like I say, that the gentleman over there was talking about this and making, and I'm curious because you work in this area. You work in this area, and there's a matter of terminology, and what you call something matters.
Okay, but again,
right?
what the DEC is calling it is high volume hydraulic fracking, and that would be considered low volume hydraulic fracking.
I think,
again, it's a terminology deal.
Rich, I think he's just asking about terminology, and fracking, hydrofracking, and hydraulic fracturing are all synonyms. There's no difference.
Hi, my name is Jim Schutz. I work for an environmental consulting company. Thanks for your talk. I have 2 questions, one technical and one a little more philosophical, I guess. First one, in your picture of setting the casing, it looked like, and maybe it was just how the picture was and the way it was described, but it looked like multiple casings were being grouted at once. Is that the technique, or do you case and then drill and then case and then drill?
No, basically what you saw was the 2 conductor casings surrounding the 7-inch casing. So remember, the 2 conductor casings went to 126 feet and 138 feet.
And then those were grouted initially and then drilled through?
Right, exactly.
Okay. So secondly, I think this whole lecture series has been good, and I thank the Geology Department for putting it together. Unfortunately, there seems to be a lot of fear and a lot of misinformation out there. And I'm wondering, when the industry is going to get a little more on board with their PR campaign and try and, not in a bad way, but try and, educate and really answer questions. And that's the biggest thing that I see missing, is a proactive approach to the public and everyone's questions.
2 years ago, when I left the survey and I said I was joining the dark side, I said in one of my talks that the opposition is getting the better part of the argument because they're talking more about it. And I thought that the industry should talk about it more. Again, they didn't perceive the power of the ordinary people and how powerful they could be. I think they've now seen that, and here I am. This is the second lecture that I've done this week. Most of the people in my profession right now spend a lot of time at town meetings and barbecues and Rotary clubs and everything like that. So they're starting to understand. But What I'd like to see is more test results. That's what my purpose is all about. Yes, sir.
I don't have a position on drilling one way or the other, so I am not asking you this question with an axe to grind. I'm trying to juxtapose two things. One is your presentation, which is very scientific and makes everything sound safe, versus the stories that we read, and there are so many of them coming from different sources. In other words, there has to be some reason that New York has a moratorium on. They couldn't have imposed a moratorium simply out of fear and lack of information. There had to be some basis. And we're hearing some health stories come out of Pennsylvania, and I've heard some come out of Texas. So I can't even pronounce half the words you use, and I won't even try to spell them. I don't know you to be a truth teller or an industry fearmonger, but I'm trying to, in my mind, juxtapose your presentation with all that we see in the news. And I keep asking myself, every time you see a story about a mother with a sick child or a family that can't shower, if your presentation is accurate, then that, I guess, would lead to the conclusion that every story we've ever read about in the news is just wrong. But there do seem to be some people getting sick, and I'm trying to juxtapose your presentation with what we see in the media. Can you help me with that juxtaposition?
Sure. Testing. It's all about testing. And basically, I took ownership of that position. That's what I saw in 2008. I made it my business to know more about it. Do I know all about it? Far from it. But do I know more than a lot of other people? I think so. Can I prove my point? I'm doing it. But the question is, this is 1 year of data. Give me 2 years of data, give me 4 years of data, give me 5 years of data. The problem is, everyone talks about Chesapeake County. Then I should be seeing all types of bad types of data right there. I can't find it. I need to find it.
You're saying that there's testing being done in Chautauqua County that's not producing bad results?
No.
Or there's no testing?
If there's 10,000 wells drilled there, right? So if fracking was truly contaminating water wells, I think we'd see it in that county, don't you think?
I guess. So in other words, your conclusion is that a lot of the people that we read about in the newspaper, you know, whose child got sick, or they can't shower, or they can't wash their clothes, or their water well became contaminated, when you read these stories, what you're concluding is that there's some other cause of what's happening to them?
Nope. Basically, you're asking me whether things happened or didn't happen. I can only tell you what I know. I can't make judgments on other people if I don't see data in front of me that suggests one way or the other, okay? So I will accept your premise that people are getting sick, but I want to know why they're getting sick.
And you're saying that...
My question is go to the doctors. I've been involved in Otsego County where basically we've been blamed that horses died. But what really happened was there was an equine disease. Again, a veterinarian came and told us that. The first week when we were drilling the Ross well, somebody said they were losing their hair. We were drilling with air. Again, no water, no fluids, no nothing, air. Okay. Another story was that they had nausea and stuff like that. So what makes me think you go through the literature and you have to find out what causes this. Bacteria. The one thing that we didn't test for individually is sulfides, hydrogen sulfide. But again, what I would see is an increase in sulfates and organics, which would produce the sulfides. I didn't see that in any of their results. So again, do I know all the answers? No. But the thing is, if I ask the right questions, I could find that out. Is there a lot of fear mongering? There might be. And is it overrated? I'm just presenting data, and that's why I want to see more data.
But you're saying by presenting this picture that we're all looking at, that if fracturing was truly having negative health effects or adverse health effects,
that Chautauqua County would be a poster child for that. Is that what you're saying?
Yep, and/or Allegheny or Cattaraugus. Because the other thing that people talk about is if you look in the DEC database, they can only identify so far 35,000 wells, okay? But then they say that there's another 30,000 missing. If you look at the early production history in New York, from 1865 to roughly around 1921, a lot of shallow oil wells were drilled in Allegheny and Cattaraugus County, almost one on top of the other. You look at the old pictures and you can kind of see that. Now again, these holes weren't cased, and there was no cement around them, and again, the DEC wasn't even around in that part of the world. So if there was going to be bad things happening, you would see it there. You go out to Titusville, Pennsylvania, where they first drilled the well, in near Meadville there. And basically they used to pool the oil on the ground because they didn't have storage facilities. So again, you go back 150 years, I should be seeing this, you know, the bad results of contaminated water. Now, do they exist? They might. Have they been tested enough for it? I don't think so.
Do you think your company does more testing than other companies, your competitors?
Right now, yes. And basically, as I said, we've spent a lot of money doing it. If you look at what I've told you, we spend about $700 per test, 150 some odd wells, some done multiple times. Do the math, it's a lot of money. Nope. Basically to produce wells, but again, we took the big word right now is social responsibility and social acceptance, and the only way to be a better, we'll say, person or better entity is to take ownership of these type of problems. It makes regulation a little bit easier for the DEC. It gives you a little bit of peace of mind. I was at a recent panel discussion, and for 2 years all I heard was frac fluids are going to contaminate the aquifers. Well, I've been talking with these people now for 2 years, and now the talk is, well, the frac fluids are not going to contaminate the aquifers. It's going to be the surface spills that contaminate the aquifers, or the air pollution, or the noise pollution. So again, it jumps. It doesn't stay in one area. And if there was more testing, I think we'd all feel a lot better. That's all.
Yes, thoroughly enjoy your very informative discussion. I think, though, you made a comment earlier about, just before his question, where there's 10,000 wells, that was all vertical wells, which a lot less volume of fluid, correct?
Right.
So I did the math. Let's say there's 10,000 wells, you said, 10,000 times 10,000. There would be quite a bit, a billion, but over a course of like 30 years, correct, or something like that?
Yes.
So with the horizontal, if I'm understanding this, I'm fairly new to this, that each well would be using several million gallons, is that correct?
Anywhere from, I want to say, 1 million up to 7 million.
So the environmental effects could, if something did go wrong, could be a lot worse than thousands of those vertical wells. Is that a fair statement, or?
I'm not sure, because basically, like I said, I've seen the difference in the frac fluid that was tested up in Canada,
okay.
And it's not truly that much different than what I've shown you tonight.
And just from my understanding, the wells that you talked about, you did a very good job. These were all vertical wells?
Yes. Again,
okay.
The Ross well was fracked in 2 places. It was fracked in the Utica, and it was fracked in the Marcellus, and basically 2,000 feet of rock separate those 2 units.
Okay. All right.
Let's maybe do 1 or 2 more questions.
So I know this is about New York State, so I'm not sure if my question's outside of your area of expertise. The testing that you did and what you were showing with the well casings and how they build the wells is according to New York State regulation, all of the things you had to go through. All of the examples that people are coming up with are all from Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Can you comment on the extreme difference between how you go about drilling in Pennsylvania versus New York State?
In the beginning, I kept saying New York has the toughest set of standards in the industry, but no one would believe me. So as people get to find out more and more about Pennsylvania and what happens there, and basically they've passed new regulations to catch up with New York. I don't know if Greg Sovas touched on this, but I'm sure he did. Again, it doesn't get much tougher. What I usually bring to the table is I bring the SGIS. I have them in my truck, but I didn't feel like calling them out. I have 3 binders. It represents over 1,900 pages. And people like to call them regulations, but they're more guidelines than anything else, because as I told you before with the stormwater pollution pits, at any time they can make up a new regulation or a guideline and make you either adhere to that guideline or not drill at all. And the other thing that no one talks about is that when wells are finished, you have to plug those wells. You have to plug them with cement. So they're not left open. The 30,000 that were shallow oil and gas producing wells, no one plugged those. And that's what the DEC's been trying to chase down for decades. But with the newer wells, you just can't leave a well open. It has to, once it's done producing, it has to be plugged and abandoned in New York.
Thanks. We haven't talked a whole, you've talked some about DEC. Last I heard, which was about a year ago, I think they had 17 people that were monitoring all the gas wells in the state. Is that about the right number?
About the right number. I think they lost one, maybe.
Which, if you just look at Chautauqua County, where I'm actually from, that would be a pretty handful of a job for somebody.
Mm-hmm.
One of the problems that I believe we have in Chautauqua County is that we have an MOU with DEC through our health department. And I don't think we've gotten a whole lot of reciprocation or cooperation from DEC when our health department has asked for assistance and for that testing that you keep demanding. I guess I'm going to ask you whether you can comment on where you think DEC needs to go to maybe provide some confidence to the public that they are doing an adequate job of monitoring and enforcement if this activity is going to continue, and what kind of change we're going to need within DEC in order to truly accommodate the industry in New York State.
Well, basically that's the million-dollar question. And the DEC, again, I worked with the State Museum for 20 years. I know these people fairly well. And they do not move at anyone's beck and call. They move at their own speed. So basically, I might want to have an application processed, but that doesn't do me any good. They will only do as much as they can. Now, to assure your fears of what might be going on in Chautauqua County, again, I was all the way in Albany, so far removed with Region 9's office there. But I think the person that probably will be handling that is Jack Dahl, who was the former regional director. So I would pose that question to Jack, and basically he could give you a much better answer than I could.
Okay, let's thank Rich again for a great presentation.